when you combine heart index, in other words, stamina information with speed information, you've got, I think, probably 90% of what makes up the equine athlete.
And that's the sneak preview of today's podcast, so let's get straight into it. Welcome, everyone, to the next episode of the Send Nutrition Podcast. You're with your host, Bryan and Peter, today, and we have a very special guest, again, making his third appearance on our very popular podcast, and it's Dr. David Evans, who, for the ones that have not heard of him before, he's a really well-respected veterinary consultant in equine sports science and is also an honorary associate professor in the Faculty of Veterinary Science at the University of Sydney. So he's very well credentialed, and we're going to be talking about the use of heart rate applications to assess performance horses. And this not only is going to be about the race horses, but also endurance. And I'll start with Peter. How are you, Peter?
Good, thank you, Bryan. Bryan, you managed to get all that out in one breath with David's credentials. He's got more credentials than a Russian five-star general.
Don't mention Russia on here. How are you, David?
Well, thank you. Yes, I'm just putting that together, the Russian five-star generals. I think hopefully a slightly nicer guy.
We're still speaking to you, so that's good. That's a start.
David, welcome back. The other two podcasts you've done have been extremely popular and a lot of good feedback from obviously existing clients, even a couple of new clients that we've managed to work with who have listened to the podcasts and got a lot out of it. In terms of this podcast, so most people, that are serious about training would have a heart rate monitor, whether it's an e-tracker or one of the European machines out of France or out of the UK, which is great. So you've got this machine, it's arrived today, you want to put it on your horse, you got all these fancy lines and you see the speed of the horse, you see the stride length and you see how fast it's going, you see how it's recovering. That's all well and good, but we actually have to do something with all that data, and you got to interpret that data into making a decision with what you do with that horse. So I think we'll try to cover a lot of that, that it's not just about having a big fancy machine, but you got to know what all the data basically say. So anything you want to start with first, David?
Well, thank you for having me on your podcast again. Bryan and Peter, it's been a pleasure, and part of my job is to, having all this history and research and so on to bring the knowledge to hopefully in plain language for all your listeners. You're right. Everything you said there, Peter, is right. And what I have to say about products that are on the market now is that the companies have looked at the research and looked at demand perhaps for these products. But I have to caution the people who are buying these, because sometimes the advertising is very slick and misleading. And misleading in this way, that part of the logic of using heart rate assessment during exercise, whether it's on a racetrack and on a treadmill, and that's the nice thing about these products, they can be used on the racetrack, not dependent on treadmills anymore to conduct these fitness tests. Some of the products advertise that you just put the gear on the horse and it spits out a number that says something about the horse's fitness, by looking at heart rates either during exercise and or after exercise. I would caution people about accepting that, because there is no research that supports that. In fact, the research supports the engagement of a human being looking at the data. And that's what I do, in brackets. Because the horse is not like a human being. There's a lot of factors that can affect the heart rate, even when they're just cantering along at half pace, slow gallop. Just a little bit of excitement. The dog is probably not even aware of it, but you can see it in the heart rates. It varies so much from 5-second period to 5-second period. And it can vary from day to day. If it's a bit windy or some other factor in the horse's life can affect the heart rate. So I would just, as a note of caution, say, be careful about the advertising which is saying buy this product and all your problems are solved.
Yeah, what you do see nowadays compared to, say, 10 or 20 years ago is even in human applications, the Australian Institute of Sport, even the Rugby League, the old coaches would say to the player, just run as fast as you can, and there was no tracking of this data, and they would just get worn out, and there was no tracking of recovery. But these days, they're all wearing those heart rate monitors that you see on their backs to track every step and to get the best, or to push them to their ability. And that's a full crossover to what you see in the equine performance world. Interpreting like that data is very important, but what you're trying to say is you need to look at it and then respond with the correct amount of training.
Yes, that's right. And then I guess it comes down to, Bryan, what's the point of putting these things on the horses? As Peter said, they now measure speed. So you can get 200-metre sectionals, you can get peak speed, you can measure acceleration if you want to dig into the data. And they're measuring stride because it's so easy to throw that sensor into these equipment. They're now measuring stride length. And then the question is, well, what's the point of that? And they're measuring heart rate, and they're getting heart rate data regularly, once per second. You can then get averages of that and look at it during the horse trotting, slow gallop, slow days, three-quarter pace. You can get, as I said, the sectional times. And of course, those speed indices, sectional times, and what did actually the horse do, even with the instructions that the jockey, the work rider might have got, did that actually happen? I think that's an important factor in terms of training horses, just to check on and even help jockeys understand what is galloping at 15s, what is galloping at 14s per furlong, what is galloping at 13s, and a lot of them, I think, probably need a little bit of help with that and probably appreciate it. So I think the session today can focus on the logic of measuring heart rates, the logic of peering at sectional times, and the logic of measuring stride length, and that comes from the frequency measurement. So perhaps we could start with something we can cross off fairly quickly. Let's talk about stride length.
Stride length, David, I learned from you, obviously, and you gave a really good analogy, which I might let you do the analogy unless you wanted me to say it sort of in really plain layman's terms.
You go for it, Peter.
Okay. Well, it sort of knocked me for six. I was thinking of someone with you on the phone. I was driving and I nearly crashed my car, and you sort of said, well, and this is funny because every trainer just really goes crazy about stride length. Oh, stride length's this or stride length's that. And you said, well, a horse that's 14 hands and a horse that's 16 hands, they're obviously going to have a totally different stride length. Yeah, it's like when you're 2 meters or you're 1.60 meter. When you run, your stride length is going to be different. So the length is almost irrelevant. It's more to do, obviously, with how many strides they're taking. I think how quickly they're going per stride. Am I on the right track with that?
Yes, that's right. And as horses accelerate, they tend to do it by increasing their stride frequency, not increasing their stride length. And so performance at high speed doesn't actually depend on stride length. It depends on a lot of factors. It depends mostly on having the right muscle structure. Now, if you look at even the human 100-metre finals with Usain Bolt in them, look at the difference in the body shape of Usain Bolt with the others. It's Usain Bolt, massive stride length, others, higher stride frequency. What matters is running fast. That's what matters in a sprint event.
David, am I right to say that, so the term uses cadence, and when you look at the brilliant thoroughbred racehorses like Winx, she had a very high cadence but a normal stride length?
Yeah, and there's some of that is relevant to the longer distance racing because they can be more efficient if they have a longer stride length. But a lot of this is determined by, as Peter inferred, by body height. And people might have measured stride length in Winx and obviously did, and said, oh my God, well, she can only stride as far as she can stride. So it's an overrated thing because it's easy to measure and it seems to make sense. But the question is, in terms of Winx's performance, it's mostly about her stamina. Yes, she had good speed as well and was able to finish off races, but that was mostly about having speed at the end of a race where she had far superior stamina. But efficiency of locomotion is really important in very long distance events. So, for example, an endurance horse, each stride, produces heat. Heat limits performance in endurance horses. Heat limits performance probably in Perth on a hot day in a 2,400 metre performance as well. But heat is not a limiting factor during a race in most thoroughbred races and standardbred races. So I just think people need to be cautious about making too much meaning out of measuring stride length. And the other thing is it's going to be affected by track conditions. Is the horse pulling or not? And if you haven't got that those factors taken into account, I think there could be some misleading conclusions. And then look, I don't think I'd do it. If I had a racehorse, I wouldn't be interested in stride length. Not interested. What I'm interested in is what does it do with a stride when I ask it to go as fast as it can over 400 metres after a warm-up. That's what's interesting to me. I don't care if it has a high stride frequency or a low stride frequency. Don't care whether it's a 15-hand or 16.5-hand horse. I just want to know how fast it goes. And that's the case for most trainers, I think. They're very keen to find out the sprinting ability of the horse, and so they should do.
David, just getting back onto the heart rates, obviously, you use that as a measure of fitness, obviously, when to increase work, when to sort of back work, sort of back it down. Speaking to a few trainers that we deal with, look, a lot of them do have heart rates now, and I'm finding there's a pattern there in terms of a lot of the trainers train all the horses exactly the same way, and they look for pretty much the same markers. And that's sometimes it could be on a treadmill, look, it could be on a track. Do you want to just explain maybe to our listeners why it's not like a one-size-fits-all?
Sure. And that's one of the main points. So let's just say what the three main points are of measuring heart rates in horses. Firstly, to guide the training intensity. And as you say, not all horses. So let's say we've done 5 or 6 weeks of pre-training, and then you're moving them up into higher speed gallops. Not all horses, and especially as you're moving them into 16s, 15s, 14s, respond with the same heart rate. So the heart rate meter is like, what is the stress in the animal? What's the stress in the horse, the performance horse, the vet horse, at a particular speed? And the heart rate tells you. The other important aspects of measuring heart rates are assess the changes in fitness over time, and is the fitness likely to be associated with superior stamina for racing, or has it got inferior stamina? So let's start with guiding training. If I sent out 20 horses that had pre-training and had done some work at say 18, 20s, 18s, I send them all out at say 16s, about 45k, sort of a slow, steady 3/4 pace, the heart rates could vary by 50 beats per minute.
That's huge.
50 beats per minute. Now, the average maximum heart rate in a racehorse, and most athletic horses, but certainly thoroughbreds, is between 200 and 230. The range. The average is about 218. So if the heart rate maximum is 218, and a horse at 15, say, is galloping with a heart rate of 210, it's very close to its maximum. And as they get closer and closer to maximum, they start to have to dig into an energy supply that's not just oxygen. So heart rate change goes up as oxygen use goes up with via their breathing and the heart pumping the oxygen to muscles. But as they get closer to maximum heart rate, they start to then have to dig into anaerobic metabolism, which results in acidosis and other biochemical changes in muscle. And so for stamina, what you'd like is a horse to be able to gallop at 15s with a much lower heart rate than 200, because they haven't gone so far into digging into that alternative energy source. They're still cruising on oxygen.
And is that what separates the better horses from the average ones?
It separates the horses with better stamina from the other ones, that's right. So this oxygen transport pathway is about stamina, resisting fatigue. So fatigue starts to come in as you get closer and closer to maximal heart rate. And during a race, every horse will be at its individual maximum heart rate, whether that's 205 or 225. They'll all be racing at maximum heart rate. And so there's some advantage. I wouldn't encourage people just to conclude from that statement that you can measure fitness by taking maximum heart rate. You can't. It's a combination of heart rates at different speeds and maximum heart rate. And looking at recovery also tells you something about how stressed the horse was in a gallop. But yes, would for anything beyond 1400, you need stamina. So let's go back to what a thoroughbred race, and we're focusing on thoroughbreds here, but the principles apply right across the whole spectrum of horse performance. In thoroughbred races, the minimum distance is about 1,000. A horse can gallop fast for about 800 metres before having to tire because of fatigue. So 1,000 metre racing is not really dependent on what the heart rates are. Doesn't have a big component, a very minor component of stamina. But some horses have brilliant speed and still can't finish off a 1,000 metre race because that's all they've got. They're like a quarter horse, quarter of a mile, 400 metres. Quarter horse racing doesn't depend on stamina at all. It's just a mad sprint like a human 100 or 200 metre race. But as the distance of the event increases, the importance of the heart rates increases. So for Melbourne Cup, you're not going to get away, and that's the extreme. And I've looked at Melbourne Cup horses, several of them, with heart rates measured in track work, heart rates measured in treadmill fitness tests. They have got superior heart rates. They've got lower heart rates during three-quarter pace work. Their heart rate maximums actually vary quite a bit. It's about how they're coping at high-speed gallops, but they're not maximal. So it might be, at 13.5 to the furlong. They're very different from your average horse.
David?
Yep. So that's a long answer to a short question. But basically, if you don't know what the heart rate response to the training is, you can make training errors. And most of the training errors that trainers make, I've got to say, in America and in Australia, is undertraining.
And I think that goes back to the point what you said about, we can't train every horse the same way because they've got this, this brilliant sort of piece of technology, and it's like all the data's there. And in my opinion, working with you for a number of years now as well, is that you've got, I think, using the data, if you know what the data means, the trainer can use it to their advantage or the owner uses it to their advantage, because when you can increase the speed or the duration of that horse, you're not just guessing at it because that's what Tommy did or that's what Johnny the track rider said, it's ready to go quick now. With the actual numbers, the numbers don't lie. So if you've got $1 million horse, the last thing you want you want to be doing is guessing when when the horse needs to go quicker and when it does it. So it's almost like an insurance policy that the heart rate gives you, but then you got to be able to know how to interpret the data. And I think that's where you come in. You just go through the data and go, all right, it's ready or it's not. You give advice or sort of recommendations as well. Is that pretty much the nuts and bolts of it?
Yes, it is. And what I say is, well, okay, this horse is galloping at a certain speed. You're doing three-quarter pace at 15s. Well, it's too slow because you are training the aerobic system, but you must train the anaerobic system and you must train muscles. So if the horse is galloping at too slow a relative speed, heart rates are too low at 15s, it must gallop at 14s. And I've had horses that must gallop at 13s, 13 and a half, in order to stimulate the muscles to grow the muscle cell size, change the internal chemistry of muscles to resist fatigue. And if you don't train muscles in that way, the horses are undertrained.
It's a fine line. It's a fine line.
Yeah, absolutely.
I was just going to say,
a fine line. Mm-hmm.
I was just going to say, David, it's a fine line between obviously going too slow and then overdoing it on the other spectrum and going too fast. And that's where I think, from a probably trainer's point of view, I'd rather probably err on the side of caution and maybe be a little bit conservative. And then obviously, if you've got a diet which is high in carbohydrates and you haven't got your right levels of protein and obviously not enough fat as well. So if you're under training and you're overfeeding, I mean, that's just a recipe for disaster as well.
Yes, that's right. And undertraining leads to other disasters. So what often happens in Australia, and we've looked at in a study in Sydney, and I've mentioned this in previous podcasts, where trainers tend to jump up the speed very quickly. They do some work at 15s for a couple of weeks, 3 weeks, and then they think, okay, it's time for a barrier trial. Oh, yeah, that went okay. give it another one, okay, and then give it a couple of sprint ups on the track and off to the races. It's too much of a jump. There's not enough training in between. And that sets horses up for failure in another way, injury. Because they haven't, their limbs, their muscles haven't had exposure for long enough at those fairly intense but not maximal speeds, they're not ready for racing. Their legs and muscles are not ready for racing often. Not all trainers. Some trainers do a great job of getting this right. But if you use a heart rate, you're not guessing, and that's the bottom line, about what would be the ideal training speed. And this is part of my service. When I say, yes, I'll look at the heart rates, well, why bother? I spoke to a trainer a month ago, so well, why bother? I said, okay, well, is it worthwhile considering training different horses at different speeds and knowing that you can increase it from 16s up to 15s or 15s up to 14s or 14s up to 13s safely? Because then you can, instead of doing it once or twice a week, you can do this. And I've seen horses in England train at this sort of speeds 4 times a week. Now, that's outrageous, probably for a lot of Australian trainers to consider. But French trainers and English trainers, the ones I watched when I was over there often do this. And not surprising. They bring, they produce a lot of good stayers and middle distance horses. Yes, so it's that undertraining sets up for failure.
Oh, we 100% agree with you, David, in terms of when a trainer does say, why bother for something in terms of even heart rate or even nutrition, the progression of what technology or what research has come probably in the last 10 years, you want to really know where you stand. You just don't want to feel what the horse or what the human body is doing. There are ways to measure it and to get the best of its ability through that training and nutrition. And any little assistance you can get is going to give you that 1%, 5%, 10% advantage over the rest of the field. So ticking every box is like totally what we try and do in the nutrition world, but also what you're trying to do in the training world. And yeah, it totally makes sense that you would bother and not that why bother attitude. And that's the trainers that are going places.
Yes, that's right. As I mentioned before, I've had clients in all around the world. I've got clients in Australia now. They take me on because the last client I have taken on, I've said, well, it might get outrageous for you because I'll give you feedback saying, well, why are you training like this? This is not a sprinter, even though it's bred to be a sprinter. It's more middle distance or 2,000-metre horse. So we need to change everything. And he said, I want to hear that stuff. I said, okay, let's go.
Yeah. And I've seen recent videos of top leading stables even showing that process of looking into many aspects of the horse and then identifying, it's more of a sprinter than a stayer or vice versa. And it really is interesting and really good to see the in-depth look at this so they can adapt their training. But even going back to progression in research, even in 2019, there was a study in endurance horses. So another industry that really has to look at their training and also their nutrition. And they did find that effective metabolic switch, which means switching from the carbohydrate consumption to lipid or that fat, so the oil source consumption is so important in maintaining stamina in those horses. And what does that do? That prevents injury, and that actually promotes a better performance towards the end of those endurance rides, 160 kilometers, 200 kilometers, and then you're getting better performance. So imagine if you ignore all that research, ignore the training, ignore heart rates, ignore nutrition, you're probably giving away several kilometre advantage to your opposition.
Absolutely right, because those horses are operating at the extremes, and sometimes horses still rarely die at those events. So the stress of high body temperature and dehydration and electrolyte disorder is extreme in those horses. Yep. And so the endurance riders and horse trainers took on heart rate measurements very early. I'm talking 50 years ago, 60 years ago, in the sport. They realised this was an important measurement.
There's nowhere to hide. There's nowhere to hide in a 160 kilometre race. You know, you can hide in a 1,000 kilometre race, but you can't over 160 kilometres, hey?
Yeah, that's right. But let's just round that off by saying in a 1,000-metre race, the heart rates aren't too relevant. It's all about that anaerobic metabolic system and having big muscles with the right internal chemistry, and the heart rates don't matter so much. You can win 1,000-metre races without having even average stamina. It might be a sort of an event that's 90% anaerobic, not dependent on oxygen, 10% dependent on oxygen transport and stamina. At the other end of the spectrum in thoroughbred racing, 3,200 metres would be 95% stamina or more.
And I'd hate to think, David, I hate to think, David, how many horses obviously, you know, would be a 2-year-old and, you know, win a 1,000-metre race, and then for some reason they get left at 1,000, 1,200, where maybe as an older horse and you know, you'll be able to measure this with heart rates, lactates and everything like that, you know, might be a superior horse over 2,400, but that horse will never get to that staying distance because it won a race at 1,000 and someone just said, well, it's a sprinter, it's not a stayer.
Correct. Or it's bred to be a sprinter, and it just the breeding is fluky. You know, it's fluky, and so what the fitness measurement says is what did this coupling between that stallion and that mare actually produce, not what we hope it produced. I mean, I've got plenty of examples in work I've done where I've had to say, well, look, this horse has got might be at the low end of the spectrum. Yes, it's got speed. It's winning barrier trials at Randwick. And this was a real horse. I've mentioned this horse before. And it's not unusual. It's bred to sprint, can sprint. And then I said to the trainer, you know, why are you racing it over 1,400? I think you should just back off. And even if you can find a 1,000-metre race, just limit its life to 1,000 or 1,200 metres. But no. Off again it goes to 1,400 metres and runs sixth. I didn't understand. I didn't seek to understand, but the numbers didn't lie. And on the other end of the spectrum, as you say, you've got horses that do well at 1,200 metres over a 2-year-old, but in fact they have, and bred to, so that's where they sit. But if you actually look at their stamina, they might do much better at 1,600.
Well, that's why they could possibly win that bigger race at 1,600, whether it's a listed or a group, or they might be, you know, sort of placing in you know, maybe Saturday races, you know, over 1,000 metres. And I mean, I've learned that obviously working with you, but that's such an important point because obviously the industry, it's so expensive to buy horses, to train horses, to feed horses. So wouldn't you want to know what that horse actually has under the bonnet rather than just saying, oh, well, it's won a race, it's a sprinter, or it's, you know, or it's a stayer, you know, sort of vice versa?
Yeah, I guess, you know, people might think, okay, let's just keep it as a sprinter, and because it'll be worth more. If it's a mare, it might be worth more in the sale ring, or its progeny might be worth more if we just keep it as a sprinter. So the different factors come into that. But if it's a matter of winning prize money, or even maybe more opportunity to win black type races, perhaps if it is now running fourth and I'm getting a measurement which says, well, in fact, this horse has got far superior stamina, and if you go in a 1,600 metre race and just ask the jockey to use its speed late in the race, I think you'll find a stamina plus a little sprint home might do a good job.
I think also, David, for your services, obviously Bryan and myself have used your services as owners, and you know, like, I hate to say it, but you know, 100% of the time you were right when you sort of said to us, look, you know, this horse is so good, and you know,
what was that, right? Sometimes limited.
Yeah, limited. Yeah, to be polite, and you know, you sort of said, you know, boys, save your money and sort of move on. And as an owner, some people are going to get like frustrated and angry, and you know, what are you telling me? But you know, when you're spending all that money, you don't want to waste money, and you know, you can cling on to false hope, or you can be a realist as well. So we've used your services as owners, and you know, you have obviously proven yourself right, and I think, Bryan, I appreciate it because obviously, you know, we've had some success with what we've been doing, but I find that you don't hold on as long as you normally would, and you. Like, it's a false economy. Like, you go, oh, geez, you know, it's going to win, and then, you know, you get disappointed, and it's like 2 years down the track, and it's like, geez, I wish I did it, you know, 2 years earlier.
Well, thank you for the feedback, and I appreciate that. But with those horses that didn't have great stamina, what we did, and you had a trainer who was amenable to, at that stage, amenable to changing the training. And so I guided the training using the heart rates. I think there were improvements there as well. So just a practical example, that even if a horse has got only average stamina, 90% of the time that stamina can be improved by appropriate training. And that will be reflected in the heart rates, which will come down during exercise at half pace or trotting or whatever. But there will also be changes in the muscles, which we can't measure if we train it at the right speed. And you won't get it training at 16s. Never. In any horse will you get it. If you're getting muscle adaptations at 16, it's probably not going to be very handy at 11-second furlongs. So all horses, I believe, 95% of horses can be improved by appropriate training.
And one thing I'd like to say is the ones with the limited ability, they really do make good dressage and show jumping horses. Yeah,
Yeah, well, dressage is a skill, and having a brain to learn to respond to commands and having the skill, and patient trainers. So there's completely different demands on the horse, yes. So not surprising.
David, for any of our new listeners, let's just say someone listens to this podcast as their very first podcast, and they're really sort of interested in terms of, if you can give an example, let's just sort of stereotype what's happening in Australia in terms of the standard Australian training regime compared to what you're sort of more about. And I know it probably relates more to horses over a mile and above, but I find it from working with different trainers that they pretty much train the sprinters as what they do the stayers. So a lot of them don't change the work around. So can you explain to maybe our new listeners is what's the biggest difference, obviously, to what you recommend to what's getting done in industry at the moment?
I guess, and I think even for 1,200 metres and beyond, what I'm saying is relevant in that you need to give more time in that first prep. And because the research says, and it's not because I think anything, I heard some other scientist talk like this when he was asked what he believed about the future of vaccines or something. He said, I don't talk about what I think, I talk about what the research says. And research says that in Australia, the jump up in speed is too sudden. They don't get enough exposure at the right speeds to prepare them for racing, and therefore lots of shin soreness, fetlock sprains in 2-year-olds, and fetlock sprains can be an ongoing career-limiting injury. So longer preparations. Give the horse time. You can't do it in 9 or 10 weeks. Any horse of mine, I would want it really well trained over 14 weeks. That includes all the pre-training. 14 weeks is my program. Now, obviously that costs owners money, and plenty of examples, of course, where horses don't have a 14-week prep, including pre-training, and do just fine. But it's riskier. So it's about probabilities. And also, I think, more exposure per week to a right training speed. So what heart rate measurements do when people say to me, well, what are we going to do? How's this going to work? I'll say, I will give you feedback about the right training speed. And if it's the right training speed, you can do it not twice a week. You can consider 3 times a week. And if you're really brave and you're happy with 3, we can design a program where they're exposed to the right training speed 4 times a week, as it was as I saw in England with the top trainers over there training 1,400 up to 2,400 metre racehorses.
And I think maybe some of our listeners are going, geez, that sounds crazy. Like, how can you do it 3 or 4 times a week? And the way you can do it is, you've got your years of experience. But the other thing is the numbers don't lie, and you can see how the horse is handling it, obviously, how it's recovering. You've got the trainer there, looking at the horse, feeling its legs. And look, as an example, sort of for human health, Bryan's gone back to the gym and he's doing 20 kilogram bench presses, and he goes, geez, this is way too easy. I'm just going to go up to 80 tomorrow. And then he pops his shoulder and goes, oh, wow, geez, what was all that for? So, I mean, it's a pretty bad example, but it's true.
It's true. It's full human application. Yeah.
It's that simple, really. That you have to give the structures, the muscles mainly, and also the bone and the cartilage and the ligaments and tendons, structures time to adapt. They don't happen in a week. And you've got to give it the time. And then we know from other research that once you've given them that proper training, don't let them detrain, let all those adaptations disappear. A lot of racehorses have very brief careers. Well, don't put them out in the paddock for 2 months just because someone thinks it needs a spell.
Because it makes you feel better. Hey, let's put it in a paddock for 2 months because it makes me feel better.
Well, maybe it'll mature, or maybe it'll whatever is the phrases that people come up with, as excuses to turn them out. Very little magic happens during a spell, and that's the point of good training. Once you've got those structures well prepared, well trained, look after that. The thoroughbred trainers get it right. They most of them get it right. And when a horse is racing, they're racing every week. Some of these horses, most of these horses, racing every week.
And just to put on record too, obviously, David, your service is not to replace the trainer, because obviously, some people can get a little bit sort of defensive, and it's not to replace the trainer. It's to work with the trainer, obviously, as a team to guide the trainer. Obviously, the horse, the horse is there in front of the trainer every single day. It's, the trainer's looking at the attitude, the reaction, whether the horse is going sour. So it's not, obviously, numbers is one picture, but it's not the only picture, yeah?
No. I insist on talking to the trainer about the numbers, and if the numbers are not impressive, I say, well, is this horse pulling? Is this a problem in this? Oh, yeah, it does get itself a bit. Oh, okay. So we have to be careful about the numbers in this horse. What happened? What happened on Thursday? We got heart rates very different there. Oh, the track. Yeah, no, sorry. The track was a bog, and we had it was just a muck up, and the horse. There's a wind was blowing. The horse wasn't relaxed at all. I said, okay, well, so we can take that out. And yes, it's a conversation as well. It's a partnership, is the way I view it.
And another addition to that is obviously from experience. So we've working with you with track riders. Obviously, there's some unbelievably great track riders, and then obviously there's other track riders that possibly shouldn't be track riders as well. So it's amazing what happens when you put a heart rate on that horse, and obviously the rider knows that the speed is getting monitored. It aids them to get the timing better. These beepers work great, but nothing lies in terms of the the GPS obviously in a heart rate. So I find that if a trainer's really serious and they're just asking feedback, oh yeah, it's great, you're hearing the same jargon every single day, but the numbers are going, well, you're going too fast or you're going too slow. So for a stable, that information is paramount, because that horse is getting worked exactly how it needs to get worked, and that means obviously if it is getting worked at the right speed, the horse can get to the races quicker, where if it's going 3 or 4 seconds slower than what it needs to be, then the owners might be paying bills for 2 months longer, and then if it first runs, they might get injured because it's unfit.
Yeah, exactly right. And also, I think at the other end of the horse's career, if the trainer knows that he's done everything in his power to produce the best results, and taking into account the horse's natural sprinting ability and its aerobic fitness for longer distance racing beyond 1200, or even at trained at even at 1200 metre racing, if he's done all he can, and now it's running fourth because it's getting a bit older, maybe a few niggles, there's no point trying a whole lot more with different training. You've done your best, and it's time to talk to the owner about a different career, start or whatever.
And just to let our listeners know too, that obviously your services still work with the treadmill. So if someone's sort of based on a property, they don't go out to the track every single day, you can monitor all these numbers on a treadmill as well, yeah? Oh yeah, I mean, I've got a database for hundreds and hundreds of horses on treadmills, and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of horses on the track. And in ideal, if I was setting up a training farm, and I wouldn't do that, the hassle of looking after a track is too much, but a treadmill would be, or several treadmills would be there, and they would be used every day. And those fitness tests can be done. It's harder to get the maximum heart rate because it's alarming to people to see horses gallop at 16s on a treadmill. You might have to gallop at 16 to get a maximum heart rate. So if there is a treadmill, I usually combine the treadmill, trot, and gallop data with track data to get those high end results. So it's a combination. And I've got one last question, David. You put an article recently on your LinkedIn page about is it the heart index or the heart score?
The heart index, I call it. Yeah,
the heart index.
Score. Yep.
Do you want to let our listeners know sort of what that is, just sort of briefly, and sort of how it, how it's different to a heart score? Obviously, your heart index.
Yeah. Heart score was the concept that people used 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago. It was but based on doing an ECG, an electrocardiogram on horses, and coming up with a score which was roughly related to heart size. And horses with big heart score occasionally were good horses. Horses with low heart score, this electrocardiogram index of heart size, often didn't perform well. So there was a loose sort of relationship, but not good enough really to make too many serious decisions on it. So I've called mine heart index. I'm still assessing the capacity of the heart to pump blood, pump oxygen, in the blood, to the capacity of the lungs to deliver oxygen to the heart, capacity of the heart to pump, so it's heart index. The heart index, the average is 100. I normalise it to 100. The highest heart index I've ever recorded is about 135, which means incredible stamina. And the question is, what sort of speeds it got? Is that an endurance horse? That's a thoroughbred, but actually should be at endurance races, or does it have speed? And low heart index might be around about 75. So a huge range. And that's what surprised me, I guess, when I started looking at commercial thoroughbred, racehorses. A massive difference between horses with low cardiovascular capacity, so heart index, massive. It's not subtle. So that enables me to say reasonably confidently when I measure, and as I say to trainers, I need to have access to the horse for a couple of weeks to get the measurement, because I want to get it right. I don't want it just one bit of gallop data. I don't want it just to trot once. I want to trot 3 or 4 times in this 2-week period. I want some half pace work 3 or 4 times, 3/4 pace work, and it must give me at least 1 or 2 sprints in that 2-week period. You put it all together and say, yep, okay, we've got the same sort of data, same sort of results for 2 weeks. This is your horse. What's its heart index, 75 or 135? And then, having got that information, then the next question is, okay, what's the horse doing now? What's its top speed, which we get because we've got the speed data from the equipment that's on there with the heart rates. So, okay, well, this horse's maximum speed is pretty ordinary. And its best 200 metres is pretty ordinary. And its heart index is low. It doesn't look like an athlete at all. It hasn't got speed and it hasn't got stamina. So you can maybe try to get a win by not racing at midweek in the city. Maybe we work even on this horse's fitness and try and get a win. If it's a filly or an mare, you think, okay, just one win would be nice. Okay, well, let's just take a month to change the training. If your owner's interested, we try and get a win out of the city, and let's just do our best for a month and see what happens. That's just one example.
It takes all the guesswork out of it, as you said, and so obviously your service is as good for owners as what it is for trainers. But what I liked out of it with Bryan is that, well, we're not wasting time, and I think we don't have egos, and I want to know the truth, and whether it's good news, whether it's bad news, I just want to know, because no one likes to waste time and money. And I think if you hang on to false hope, you're only kidding yourself, in my opinion.
Well, it's bad for a bank account too, isn't it?
Yeah, and furthermore, you want that horse to reach the ability that it has.
Exactly, as a 3-year-old. Yeah. As a 3-year-old, you want the horse running at the peak of its ability in the right distance races, having the right training. As a 2-year-old and 3-year-old, you want it happening as a 3-year-old.
Yeah, because just like humans, we're not all born athletes.
No, regardless of theories of breeding, it's the genetics is fluky, as I mentioned, and no, some of them are not athletes, and some of them are more like quarter horses. Black Caviar, more like a quarter horse. But she's not. I've never measured anything on her, but they did the right job because she was raced according to what she was. But a lot of horses with speed that are running 4th, 5th, 6th could perhaps be trained a little differently and put in 1,400 and 1,600 metre races. a lot of horses running over the distance because that's the way they're bred. Well, actually, no, there's nothing there. But you know what? It's top speed's not bad. So back off. Back to what it was doing well as a 2-year-old, back to 1200. And so when you combine heart index, in other words, stamina information with speed information, you've got, I think, probably 90% of what makes up the equine athlete.
Yeah, it's fantastic information, David. And I think that about wraps this one up, because if you look at the whole profile of what you're trying to achieve with the heart rate and what your services are, David, and I'll definitely put all the links for anyone that wants to contact you and deep dive further, even this article, which will go along with it. But when you have the heart rate data, you can measure that speed profile, you can measure that aerobic fitness, and then make that assessment. But the best person to look at that is an expert, and that is yourself. So, yeah, I hope our listeners have gained some knowledge from this and would like to explore this technology use to help achieve the ability of their horse in whatever discipline it is, namely racehorses for David. But in your endurance side, there are others that look into this. And also remember, if you are a trainer and you're looking at your feed barn and you don't actually know why you're feeding a certain product, at SEN we have many racehorse trainers Australia-wide that have their horses on our program. They thrive. What we're aiming to do is decrease those incidences of metabolic problems such as colic and ulcers. We're trying to promote stamina. We're trying to make that recovery process better post-race and post-training through good, proper nutrition, which has an even profile. So that's just a small plug. I won't keep going on about it, but it all goes hand in hand, that whole management and training of horses, right down to those readings for heart rate. So, yeah, is there anything else to add, David, to that?
No, I think that's good, Brian, and thank you, Peter.
David, pleasure once again, and I'm sure it won't be the last time that you're going to be on here. We'll come up with another topic. Obviously, we might get some feedback from different trainers or even different sort of clients of ours what they would like you to cover, and we'll make it happen again this year sometime. So thank you for your time once again.
Pleasure. Have a good day.
Thanks, David.
Thanks so much.